Another hashtag for you, hashtag because it's 2016. And I think that he's absolutely right. Why not? It is time to make sure that we have gender equality in everything that we do. Something that I was introduced to late last year, that I think is a tremendous way to represent equally men and women is the panel pledge. For those of you that are in the business of organising events, organising seminars on behalf of the government, a really easy way to show gender diversity and equality is to take the panel pledge yourself. Basically, this means that you have equal representation of men and women at every event that you hold. How many of you have been to an event where there's, 4 blokes that are the speakers and the guests and absolutely no women? I mean, I'm putting up my hand. It happens regularly. Often I'm the only token woman, which I always find quite interesting. So you can take the panel pledge yourself and you can ensure that if you are participating in planning an event like that, make sure that you have a female MC. I know a good one. I'll give you a number. Or you could have, 2 female speakers. Make sure you have 2 male speakers. Even it up wherever you can. And it's just those subtle little ways like that that add to us all having gender equality. A woman that has been such an inspiration, I think, to many women in this country is our next speaker. She does have a long biog, and I'm going to read it all. I'm sorry, I'm going to read it all. People hate their biogs being read out, but I think it's tremendous that we do so. Her name is Christine Nixon. She was the first female police commissioner in this country, and I think that deserves a round of applause. Aside from anything else, I won't read the whole biog if you don't want to, but she also led the Victorian bushfire relief efforts, and she was the former chair of the Victorian Bushfire Reconstruction and Recovery Authority. She has just been so tremendous for so many women all over this country, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome her here today. Christine Nixon.
Thank you. It's an amazing opportunity to come along to this ground. I've watched it enough on television and watched the cricket recently, and it's also an amazing opportunity, I think, for all of you and for me and for others to come together to think about this issue. Can I pay my respects to the Kaurna people and thank you for your welcome, Tamika. I think we sometimes, when we have the welcome, we don't necessarily recognise the significance of it. And I remember when I was in Melbourne, it was explained to me by an Aboriginal elder who gave a welcome at a function I was at. And what he said was that I'm welcoming you to my country, to the food and to the water, and I'm going to provide safety for you as well. And I think that's a really significant piece when we're thinking about this issue. So thank you, Tamika, and to elders who might be here and those past. I give my respects to the Minister. Lovely to see you and to hear you, and to know that South Australia has such a great woman advocate, and I think many, many other people. And to Amanda, thank you for not reading the CV. And it isn't, because I don't think I've achieved a lot. I think I have. But there are other things that I'd like to talk about. And I guess that's my opportunity today. I've been invited along to talk. I'm here on behalf of the Australian-New Zealand School of Government. One of the decisions I made after I finished as part of the formal role with the Victorian Bushfire Reconstruction and Recovery Authority was that I was going to pay more attention and to spend more of my time in working with women, and to, not on the basis of any way of suggesting women need to be fixed, which is part of this argument that's gone on for some time, but more about the idea that I wanted to encourage, to share some of my learnings and to just kind of focus on women. And so for the last 2 days in Adelaide, I've had the great pleasure of working with about 40 women from across the public service and local government as well, and I really enjoyed it. And for those women who are here, some of you, yes, I'm going to say some of the same things, and I'm sure you'll be quiet and not heckle me or anything. But this is a really interesting issue, and I suppose I've started, thinking about this, or maybe not start, but I guess I've thought about it for 40 years now. So about 1972, when I was 10, I joined the New South Wales Police. And they took them really young in those days. And it was so that era for me, the 70s, was, there were hardly any women. We might dispute whether New South Wales or South Australia had the first woman, but we were real close. Of course, New South Wales just had a lovely celebration for 100 years of women in policing. And so I suppose for me, joining when there are very few of them, like 130, and experiencing that era. And so for the 70s, my sense of optimism about what was possible, about opening up barriers, about changing systems and views, were part of a sense of saying, things can be different for us. And as a 19-year-old, very limited career opportunities. People expected I'd stay for 2 or 3 years and then get out and marry and have kids and not bother. And so I suppose my own experience in this is kind of coming all the way through the 70s and then through to the 80s. And seeing some change, and in my own experience, as in a seniority system, I got to be a sergeant with 15 years' experience. Not because I'd done anything particularly, and not because the fact is I had a master's degree from Harvard and an undergraduate degree in politics and philosophy that I'd got, the undergraduate degree part-time. None of that counted. It was how long I'd been in the organisation. And one of the things about the public service is to think about its history, about where we've come from. There are still people in policing, and there are still people in the public sector who think that the experience, the years you might have, should be the only factor that determines. And I remember as a youngster, just turning 19 when I joined, I figured if they all died in front of me, I too could become the police commissioner. Because that was the way the system worked. And so I've come through that, eventually getting promoted to a superintendent, and as managing from 5 to 300 and learning what that's like. And they were mostly blokes, of course, but learning about what management was like, what good management was like, and what bad management was like. And then into the 90s, eventually becoming the first woman assistant commissioner in New South Wales. And I pretty much got that job on the basis of a panel of 11 people. One of the things I've learned about panels early is I only ever got jobs when there were more than the people from within the organisation on them. And if I can advocate anything at all, it's a very important thing to think about who's choosing. And I'll talk a bit about that as I kind of go through some of these slides. And then the 90s, I applied for a job in New South Wales as the Commissioner of Police. And I was then an assistant commissioner, and I applied, and people said, gee, you're a bit ambitious. I said, seriously, why wouldn't I apply? And then I applied for the job in South Australia as the Commissioner of Police as well, got real close. And some people even suggest I got it, but a change in politics, kind of saw it go another direction. But the fact is you do put yourself forward, and I did do that. And then, of course, along came the Victorian job, and I didn't even see it. My father rang me up. And I guess this is where I get to the men bit a bit. My father rang me up and said, Christine, I've got a job for you. I said, Dad, I have a great job now. I work on the south coast of New South Wales. I have a team of 1,000 people, and they're just fantastic to work with. I had a farm, and nobody knows what I do in the New South Wales Police, nor do they care. And so I'm just going to be down here and do the job. He said, no, time's up. He said, you stepped off for a while, time's up to have a go at something else. And so he and my husband, an overwhelming force, got together, and I applied. And people say, how'd you get the job? I applied. No headhunters, no nothing. I just went through the system like anybody else could. And and was the most shocked person in Australia when they announced me that I'd actually got the job, and so it went. So then, of course, 2000s was learning a lot about managing a very big organisation, recognising that it did not represent the community in any way, shape or form. It did not have very many women, in fact 14%. It did not have very many older people who were kind of new when starting, nor did we reflect the diversity of our immigrant community in Victoria. And so all of those things were part of it. Nor did we reflect the sexuality either of our communities, gay and lesbian police officers, transsexual police officers. And so we had some but not many, and they certainly didn't reflect the community. And so for me, those challenges were really important to think through. And then, of course, I went to the bushfires and then came to the point I'm at now. So I want to talk a bit about the current state of play, because it's not pretty. And some of you will come along and say, you know, what are we doing here? I hope you haven't. I hope all of you have come with an attitude today that says, I'm just going to kind of see what happens, that I'm going to kind of save my judgment, that I might just go, yeah, this is all crap. That you might not do that. It might be a good thing for the day. You've invested the time, so's the state, in you coming along and spending some time to reflect and think about where is South Australia public sector up to? Why is it that we have the barriers that we might have? And I know the public sector's come further than many other organisations, but I still think in some areas there's a long way to go, particularly in leadership, particularly in some of the organisations that don't have strong representation of women within them. So just to kind of, you can see it. I guess the piece for me, this is a piece that I've sort of developed. It's well referenced if you ever wanted to look up. But they're just some of the kind of things. So the penalty about having babies, I always think this issue about babies is a bit strange. Like, it's as though we don't even understand that women have babies, you know, and that guys are involved too. And if this is like, you know, it's a revelation. Imagine that, women have babies. And it's sort of like, and you know, that's what we want them to do. And dads want to be part of bringing up kids, but somehow we've managed to kind of either forget it or not notice it, or even worse, discriminate against people who do. I didn't have kids, you know, but I've had a lot to do with a lot of other people's kids. And I think it's just to see, so you just look at that. In terms of education, I'm the Deputy Chancellor at Monash University in Victoria, and I go to lots of graduations, and 66% of graduates now are women. So part of what women were told is get out and get an education, girl, and they are. And I see them in many, many areas, and we're focusing on some areas that there are not women. Workforce participation rates, I don't know if you know about a country like ours, a wealthy, strong economy. There are very many women who can't work and want to work, and so we're very low levels according to our OECD figures. The pay gap, which the Minister alluded to, I think in 2015 figures is now 18% pay gap between men and women. Board appointments, we've had this big push lately through the ASX that we were looking for women on boards, and two things have happened about that. They've gone from 8.6% to 15.6%, and I think it's even probably a bit higher now. But one of the things that's part of that is that the women who already had board positions have now got more of them. So we shouldn't just suggest this is okay. But there's a thing about the board positions that I think we need to think through, and that is sometimes it's about sort of diverting the women from really where I think many of them should go, and that is to run things. To actually not head off into the not-for-profit space or the board space, non-executive director. CEOs, we hardly have any in the top 200 companies within this country. And of course the C-suite, it's an American term, but it's an Australian study that says opportunities for women to become CEOs is men have 9 times greater chance of doing that. And this little pincer is an interesting one. There are more women going to university, so you get more, the orange line, and less men. And I'm told that over time, the prediction is there will be even less men and more women go to university. And so it's going to be an interesting challenge we've got about men as well, which is why I want to talk about men today too. And so you can see the figures. So women go down and the men possibility and senior roles go up. The next bit is about the pay gap. in graduates, these are even people who go to universities, still come out with pay gap differentials. And law students, there's about a $5,000 difference between people who graduate out of law school. And so you've got to say, how does that happen? The executive pay differential, there was an article in the papers just last week which says on average it's 23% difference. And the male executive, female executive, you can see the comparison of their salary rates. You've got to say, does that mean they're like $100,000 smarter than women? Does it mean that the women don't ask for the pay rises? Or does it mean that the people who hire them don't pay them properly in the first place, which is the piece I'd like to argue? The public administration difference is the lowest, and it's 8.9. But how come it's still 8.9? And I think the minister made some part of reference, which is about men in the senior roles. Childcare subsidies lead to increased participation, while childcare benefits reduce it. And there are government policies that in fact increase or reduce participation by women in the workforce. And so the Howard government introduced systems that reduced the participation of women in the workforce. And now they're going to go back again and rethink this whole issue. And of course the other bit, as you can see, is the media betrayal. I'm not going to go into that, but for women who get to be in senior positions, the way that media will treat you, I guess Julia Gillard, your own Adelaide person, is a classic example of that, but so was Joan Kerner, who never wore a spotted dress in her life when she was Premier, but forever. And I certainly have been. I was telling a story yesterday when I went to an occasion. It was a charity thing, and they were doing a cover for the magazine, but also the media were going to cover it for Blue Ribbon, which is for police officers to be remembered who had died. And I'm standing between two horses, which I knew I shouldn't have done. And one of these horses kind of went. Now, the guy took hundreds of shots, and they were great shots of me sitting in the middle of the horses. And one of the horses, went and just sort of shied back a bit. And I, of course, went, and that was the front page. So I rang the media guy up and said, what in the stuff are you doing, What's this about? You took so many other pictures. He said, oh, well, there it is. And I said, no, that's not good enough. But you see, so why would women, when they watch women in senior leadership positions, in many cases, are then focused on their, if they're any way, shape or form not perfectly formed and not perfectly dressed, then a lot of women will go, why would I bother to put myself through that? And so I think the media portrayals are kind of an important piece. So the gist of what I want to talk about is I think there's three things we need to work, three parts of this problem. And part of this came to me to think through for all the years I've been involved, but also I was invited by a men's club in Victoria to come along and talk at their father-daughter dinner. And there were all these extraordinarily successful men and their daughters in various ages, and this had gone on for years. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a really interesting thing to see, that I watch these dads who are here with their daughters, incredibly proud of their daughters. And as I talked through the speech, what I said to those men is, one day a man just like you is going to do in someone's daughter. They're not going to appoint them. They're not going to give them the right and the opportunity that they should have. They're actually going to do them in. And I said to those dads, is that fair? Is that what you want? You see, I got lucky. I got a dad who's 89 years old now, senior police officer. When he retired, he was a sergeant when I joined. But Dad got it. And he said to me one day, Christine, what are they trying to do you in? He said, you haven't done anything. You've studied, you work hard, you're trying to do the right thing. Why are they trying to do you in? And so he started to stand up. I mean, he couldn't do much for me, but he did a fair bit for other women. And so I said to those dads, dads, it's time you stepped up. It's time you started to say, what about my daughter? What about my 6-month-old? What's going to happen to her in her future? Are things going to be different? And so at the end of it, a woman came up. She said, Christine, I've been to 25 of these dinners with my dad, and no one ever had a go at the dads before. So, well, it's about time someone did. And so those dads here, or those, as it kind of says, partners and husbands and brothers and bosses and colleagues, This bit for me about men is about your kind of taking the responsibility to step up, to actually think about how you can support colleagues. As a young police officer working in Darlinghurst Police Station, one particular occasion, very late at night, I was being harassed by a detective sergeant from another location who'd come into the station, and I'd been out the back. It was an old, crappy old police station, and I'm out the back, and he started to give me a hard time. And I couldn't kind of quite get away from him. But what I didn't realise, and neither did he, that two of my colleagues, guys of course, were just sort of around the corner, and they'd actually heard what he had to say. And it got kind of a bit tense with him and I at one point, because it was really, I thought, no one around. And both of them came round the corner, literally picked him up and took him to the front of the police station and threw him out and said, "We don't do that around here. We don't do that around here." So we stand by and watch some of that. Those guys didn't. Now, after that, no one arrested me. I was really pleased. And he didn't come back either. And you say, well, he's a detective sergeant, they should have been afraid of him. These guys are about 6'6", and they weren't afraid of much at all, and certainly not him. So sometimes it's that. And so the sense of, men using their power and their capital. If the men are in charge, and they are, well, I'm still the only woman to have been a police commissioner in Australia. And all of the history of policing in Australia. And there are some women deputy commissioners, and that's terrific, and they're here, and there are other places. But it's still an issue that we need to think through. So for men, I think it's about using their capital. I don't know if you know what capital is, but in any kind of senior rank, senior position, senior organisation or any job, you have capital and you can agree to spend it and use it or not. And sometimes you've got to protect your people and you've got to spend your capital to protect them. And in other occasions, I'm asking the men to use their capital to fix things, to look around and say, what's the problem here? And how can we fix it? And I've already said about the partners and others who might step up. I think also there are real issues around this relationship, as the Minister said, between family violence and the inequities with women. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of kind of people talking about it, and in fact I'm going to Sydney tomorrow for a conference where people are going to talk about this issue between sort of the connection with family violence and women's inequity. But I certainly know, for all of the years, from my first time I ever went to a family violence incident in 1976, that it was about a power issue. Because when I went in the room and we had guns, he did not hit me. Now, I know they do things with police officers, and police, it's a dangerous thing sometimes for family violence, but in the main, this outraged person who had beaten his wife and his kid did not even come close to attempting to beat me or my partner. And so you're going to say, what's that about? It's called power. It's about power. And so this situation of the inequity between men and women, I think we'll do better in family violence and all the aspects of it if we're able to lift the inequalities that we see. So gender norms and sexual violence, the kind of one end to the other. The comment about men don't value women's perspective in business, that's just the research. It's not. For some people they say, yes, that's not the case, but the sort of evidence says in the strength that it is. It also says women are collaborators. And I mean collaborators, they work together. And where in many cases men will say, look, I'm the one who did all this. And I guess that's just a fact. You might want to agree, your own experience not be the same, but it is for many people. And I guess the other piece I wanted men to think about is this sort of low-level bullying and sexism. And there's lots of other things I could, talk about. But remember early days in work environments, people used to wonder why we marched around and pulled down the girly magazines. It's just terrible to see yourself as an object and to think about that's what people think about women, that's what the men think about. And I remember being in police stations where I did exactly that, pulled it down. And I was the senior constable. And then they put them back, and I'd go and pull them down again and kind of take them on about these issues. And then eventually when you get to be in charge, you can do lots more than just take the posters down. And so the point, I suppose, is to think about the men. If I could in any way, to all of the men who are here, many of you do a great job now, and I'm not suggesting that's not the case. Many of you are incredibly supportive of your partners and your daughters, but there are times when you might just sit by and let things go. and not ask the question, what happened? Why is this the case? Why are we not paying women an amount of money that would be equal to the men? I sat on an advisory committee to a large bank and said to the manager of the bank, are your women paid the same as men for doing the same jobs? He said, I don't know. So, well, maybe next time we chat you might be able to tell me. So next way I'm going to a meeting with him. He's going to tell me about what happened, because he also made a promise, if they weren't, he would pay them. That's as simple as that. He said, I don't know, and once he knows, he's going to have to do something about it. So I guess the next bit is about women. And I started out by saying this isn't about fixing the women, but there is a role for women and a part for us to play as well. And I think it's an important bit that we think about where we're up to. The number of arguments I've had with women that tell me that we don't need quotas and we don't need targets. But 40 years later, my ambitions about what would be the case, that everything would be fixed, is not true. Hasn't happened. And so you've got to say, so what's next? Well, we can continue to encourage and all the rest of it, and that's happening. But I think we need to think about targets and quotas. In Victoria Police, when I got there, we had 14% women sworn officers. And I said, we're going to set a target of 25%. I got taken to the Equal Opportunity Tribunal by the union, said that's not fair, and I lost. And I said, so what, who cares? We're going to do it anyway. So what? What are they going to do to me? So anyway, off we went. We looked at the ways and means that we attracted women to join us. We looked at a whole series of barriers that stopped women and people who are older and people from minority groups and a whole bunch of people and gay and lesbian people who couldn't get in to Victoria Police. And we started to think about what those barriers were. Now, I know that in South Australia, the police are working on this issue too. And I think there's a couple of warnings that we need to think about when we have targets and quotas. And that is that when we do bring in the additional numbers, and in Victoria Police we went from 14% to 28% while I was there, and we brought in older people and older women and a range of women, is we also have to figure out a way, sadly, to protect them. Because what I watched recently in a report in Victoria was a major report on sexual harassment. And what I watched was an increase in the sexual harassment of women who'd come into the organisation, and some men actually as well. And so it's got some teeth in this issue around targets and quotas, and that is you need to tell the people what it's going to be like. You need to find support for them when they come in. When they're in the academy or wherever they might be, if you're increasing the numbers, they need to know what it's going to be like and they need support around them. And so I think what happened in Victoria is I didn't do that. And so I've ended up having to take some responsibility, I think, for the fact that some of those people were harassed because there was a backlash. And not while I was there, I don't think, because we didn't get the kind of reports there are now, but I think after that, over the last 5 years, that started to be the case. So I think targets and quotas are really important because we're not going to get there otherwise. And we need to encourage and then advertise. Remember, while I was an Assistant Commissioner in the New South Wales Police, I was in charge of human resources. We wanted to attract gay and lesbian people to join the police, and we did two things, two kind of advertising campaigns. And I did it with this rough old, tough old Assistant Commissioner who had a son who was gay, and he wanted to attract people who were gay to join the police, and lesbians. And so we did big full-page ads that we paid for, and one of the ads was join the police and we'll give you sensible shoes, and that was women walking across, and the other was join the police and we'll give you the leathers. And I can't even imagine we did it, but we did. And do you know what happened? People went, gee, the New South Wales Police is interested in gay and lesbian people. And if you're a police officer, like I was, on the following day, after we'd had the major run-in with the gay and lesbian community back in 1978, you too might want to wonder about why you want to attract gay and lesbian people to join the police. Because we need to represent, we need to be respectful of diversity in our community. And so New South Wales did in fact attract a lot of people, and so had Victoria Police when we stood up for them. I guess other issues, Sheryl Sandberg wrote a great book, really interesting, about, put your hand up, take a seat at the table, all those encouragements for women, find your voice, and I'd say keep score of your success, both men and women. We need to kind of keep hold of, when things get tough, we need to sometimes think about our own success and kind of remember it. I think that many of us are afraid, both men and women. I've used it here just about the issues because sometimes we wonder what will happen to us. What if I stand up and say something? What if I do something that people don't agree with? And I suppose in my case, I marched in the Gay Pride March to show my support for Victorian police officers and administrative professional staff who are gay and lesbian. And I could never have imagined the criticism I would get from that. I was just a bit taken back, especially when my favourite newspaper, the Herald Sun, said, don't bring your Sydney waste to Melbourne. I went, I can't believe this, but that's what they did. And then I got 800 emails from my colleagues who I'd given the email system to. I should never have done that. And the emails were not positive. They all said things like, this is the end of the police as we know it, and so on. And I just wrote back, said, I want to support people who are members of the Victoria Police. And if they're doing a good job, then I'm really happy to go to long lengths to support them. And so I kind of got a call from, first of all, my media director who came and see me. He was not happy and said, you'll ruin your reputation. I went, what reputation? And then the minister called. It wasn't quite courageous as the one you might have. And I said, Minister, are you going to march with me? He said, no, I'm not, and neither should you. You'll ruin your reputation. And then my dad called. That's a bit dangerous. I said, Dad, it's okay. I'll be right. And so it went. And so in the end, I did march. And then I got death threats just before it. So that meant more police had to march. So, and it made a difference. But you know what people were trying to do to me? As the Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, they were trying to make me afraid. And they will do just that to you as well. They will try and make you afraid. You know, what will people say? What about my reputation? They'll think I'm gay, they'll think I'm lesbian, they'll think I'm whatever. And they will do that. Until very much towards the end of my time, I think that I was accused 15 times of running off with my lesbian staff officers, you know. And on one occasion, one of the media guys in Melbourne rang me up and said, Christine, I hear your husband John's left you. And I said, really? I saw him this morning. You know, it was all about trying to undermine and make you afraid. And if you have a go at this stuff, you walk out after today and say, yeah, I get this and I'm going to do something about it, watch out, because they're going to try and get you for it. You know, they will say, yeah, what about your sexuality? Yeah, what about you? What about this? So you might want to think about it, not just the women, because I think it's an important part for women not to be afraid about putting themselves forward. I guess all the work hasn't been done. I have women tell me all the time, oh, it's all fixed. No, it's not. And when they get to about 30, you know, then they kind of think, oh, gee, it's not quite as kind of open as fixed as I thought. Delusions of gender, if you ever want to kind of look at the issue about women and men, you might want to read this book. It's great, well-researched, and it simply says in the end, we're products of our own socialisation. And so the kind of differences in women are not real, they're socialised between men and women. And so if I told that half of the room that you can't do maths and you're going to be useless at this study, and I told that half of the room that you're going to be great at this maths study and you can do it all, guess what happens? That half doesn't do well, that half does well. That's what happens to us. So we get told this kind of stuff, that we can't do the things. And so I guess we have to think about the delusion, keep score, and I guess the other thing I need to say to all the women in the room is that women who are in power need to help other women up. The idea of kind of pushing them back down the ladder again is not acceptable. And the last bit, which I think has the most culprits, is this one, is called the systems. And so we've all, male and female, and what we do are important, but I think the systems really need to be looked at. And we can legislate to improve systems. We can drive policies to improve systems. So the pay women the same as men. I figured this out when I was a youngster. I was a senior constable working with about 9 inspectors in an area, an education area. I did exactly the same work as they did, and they all got paid about $25,000, $30,000 more than me. And I remember one of the union guys said to me, Christine, you have to know your worth. They're always going to underpay you unless you force them to pay you the appropriate money. And so I learned that lesson a long time ago. I think you also need a bias-free appointment and promotion system, whatever you call it. Now, it's not hard to do this. It's about getting some people from outside. It's about training people to be able to assess people's capacities to do jobs. At one point in New South Wales, we invented a system which, in fact, was anonymous. We reconstructed the organisation. We had 80 new jobs in charge of local areas, and 200 people applied for the jobs, men and women, from all over the organisation. We made it anonymous, for want of a better description. They went through assessment tools, they did exams, they did interviews, and then kind of all of the scores were kept secret until, in the end, the scores were put together. We put the names beside them. Whoever got the top mark got the top location, and we just worked our way through the 80. Women got jobs. Last time most superintendents ever got appointed in the New South Wales Police was back in 1996. And so people from education who would never been considered for promotion got the jobs. And so we were able to invent a bias-free job, and then we also trained 12 or 15 women from outside the police who ran our selection panels. You know, the world didn't collapse. The union didn't put on a blue. They said that's a fair process, and so you followed it. So you can invent decent bias-free systems. There is no such thing as a merit-based promotion panel with 3 people sitting there who work in the organisation. And if that's what you put up with next week, then what's the point of this whole process? You might want to say managers, leaders, senior executive. The flexible work conditions policy, if not, why not? Men want to look after their kids. Women want to look after their kids. I had a mother who had dementia. I needed to look after her. You've got to say, you know, that's a caring responsibility. Why not? If we need to be flexible in our work practices, why not? And that's about kind of saying, yes, you can do it, unless there's some absolutely significant reason why not. Paternity and maternity leave should be part of that process. The unconscious bias, I'm not going to talk about it because Martin Parkinson is, and he's a strong advocate for us thinking about this. But I do want to just explain one way this process might work, and he might talk about this too. It's a really simple model, and it talks about the symphony. So the symphony looked at itself and said, gee, how come all those women study music and they don't get into the orchestra? How come it's like 75% men and 25% women? So they decided to look for a system that just judged people on their talent, and that's all. And so they set up screens like a stage like this. They told all the people who were applying not to wear click, click, click high heel shoes, all to wear rubber shoes. And so the panel sat just where you are. The people, the screens were in front. Nobody knew, in a sense, from any signals as to who the person was walking across and who they sat down and they played piano or whatever they played. And they got chosen on their talent. You'll be shocked to know that half the people were women who got appointments into the orchestra and half the people were men, because it was done on talent and not the other biases. And so that kind of a process is important. I guess others, there's recognised companies are more profitable. Just really, there's some good evidence, and I just kind of thought I'd read it to you as we move to kind of the last kind of stages. It was in the papers the other day, and it talks about the profitability. So I'm amazed, says the article, that so many think having women on boards is a mere case of gender diversity, and this is just an example. At the end of the day, a board's focus is on profit and sustainability. This being so, appointing more women should have little to do with gender balance. And the study was conducted in America of top 500 Fortune companies with 3 or more female directors in 4 or 5 years outperformed companies with no female directors in every area investigated. Return on sales, they outperformed by 84%. Return on investment capital, they outperformed by 60%. And return on equity, they outperformed by 46%. Women bring talent. They bring a reflection of our community. And so that whole sort of recognition of that. And my final one is, how can any organisation afford to lose talent? The investment they've made over time is an important part of it. And so we might want to think about why flexible work practices and allowing changing systems about that is important. Again, we had systems in New South Wales Police where hardly anybody took up part-time work until it was basically said, you will agree to part-time work unless you want to come into the HR director's office and explain why you can't manage it. Nobody wanted to come in. And the final one, and then I'm happy to answer questions, and you might want to take a couple of minutes to think about what questions you might want to ask in a second. So the final bit is, often for women, there's also a vicious kind of cycle. And so we're kind of advised to downplay our personal goals and focus on collective good. We've got to mask ambition because it's unseemly to think you could be ambitious. So I won a Harvard scholarship, an American scholarship, and I went to Harvard in 1984, and a journalist said to me, what are you going to be when you grow up? I was 33. So I was pretty grown up, really. And I said, I want to be the police commissioner. And he said, you couldn't possibly be the police commissioner. I said, why not? And he said, because you just can't be. I said, well, I think I can, actually. And he said, no, you're a woman. They're never going to let a woman have that kind of a role. And I said to him, well, you're a journalist. What do you know? I should have said that more often. But I only made a mistake that day. I did go on to say I wanted to be the commissioner because the one we've got's not very good. And then they published that. It's really helpful for me. So luckily I was going overseas, and they got a new commissioner by the time I got back. Sorry. I guess even if you're judged equally competent as male colleagues, sometimes women aren't seen as likeable. So even in an anonymous Christine and Christopher have exactly the same characteristics, exactly the same backgrounds. When people are asked, who would you like to work with? Men are asked, they say Christopher. Absolutely no difference at all. But they say Christopher. So it's also being kind of likeable, and how you tell who's likeable from their name is a kind of an interesting issue. And I guess we're also told to worry less about how you're seen, yet you need to be, your impressions are important. And the research evidence on the other side is few women in leadership roles. I think we can all agree on that. High levels of visibility, scrutiny of bodies, clothing and attractiveness. This sort of idea about the media used to assessing and objectifying women, which we've talked about. Women's leadership, character, trustworthiness judged and embodied against sometimes the way they look. The number of times, I'm obviously big, and the number of times that was kind of used as an opportunity to denigrate many of the things we were trying to do in Victoria Police, and you have to just wonder why. And I suppose just to finish and to then open up for questions about this, I'm really happy to take questions and to kind of have you think through the issues. We've got a few minutes, I think, and I'm happy to kind of clarify or anything else, but I think this is a great opportunity. The fact that so many men have been asked to come along as well, it isn't just going to be a situation that women will fix or that men will fix. It's about systems, it's about all of us kind of trying to come together to make South Australia better than it is. It's always been a state that was in front in many, many ways, in so many different areas. And I hope that if you can drive this, you can actually lead the way, because the rest of the country still has a long way to go to catch up. Thanks very much.
Hang on, I'm coming up to stand next to you.
Okay.
How great is Christine Nixon, by the way? She's amazing. And The thing that made me really sad then was learning that you had had such criticism for walking in the gay and lesbian parade, because I thought, and I really hope, that you did get some good publicity around that, because when I first saw that, I thought, how tremendous is this, and what a step forward for the gay and lesbian community. So if you didn't hear good things, good, I'm glad you heard good things, because that was such a fantastic step and showed wonderful leadership. Do we have any questions for Christine? Yes, microphone down there, thank you.
Christine, that was a remarkable speech, very inspiring. Thank you so much. The question I have for you is, when you became Commissioner, you would have then been doing that, rising above your colleagues, or at different times in your career, you would have been working with colleagues, then been possibly their first female boss. How did you deal with that challenge of how you were seen?
Yep, that was it. So I suppose the first time I was, positioned with a number of people who work with me, principally guys, was when I got to be a superintendent, and I had some other smaller groups, but that was the time, and there were 300 people who work with me, and I think something like 95% of them were blokes, and it was a really interesting experience. So I got the job. It was, first of all, a job no one really ever wanted, actually. There was only 2 of us even applied, and they didn't like the blokes, so they gave it to me. So I got the job, and I remember the first time I went to talk to the team, because I wanted to talk to each of the managers of the 12 areas that I had, and to talk to them about what they wanted to do, to talk about, how we might go forward. And I remember the first one came in, and I often tell the story about this guy. He was obviously a police officer. He's kind of built like a bullet, and bald head, ran the Officer Survival Weapons Training area, which is kind of the tough end. He was ex-Vietnam vet, and he was my first kind of person that I'd asked to come in and talk to me. And he came in, and I said to him, Tom, I'm really pleased to be working with you. And he said, well, I'm not pleased to work for you. Right, good, Tom. Guess what, Tom? I got the job, and you and I are going to have to figure this out, because you know lots about your area, and I don't. Now, if you leave and take with you all the knowledge and respect you've got, I said, I'm going to miss out on what I think would be a great opportunity to work with a great partner in this process. And at that stage, he took his hat off, so whoa, that's a start, and so on. So Tom stayed, and so did the rest. And I think my way of treating people, I hope, was what I describe as good management, which was that I was respectful for the people I was working with. Clearly, they didn't all love me, and I went to a operational region in the western suburbs of Sydney, and 12 guys were in charge of each of the commands. And I said, listen, I haven't worked in operational policing for years, but I know lots about how to get stuff done, and you guys and me together, we might just be able to make a great difference. So I guess I was confident about what I was going to do. I knew that I did not know everything. For those of you who are managers, get over this bit that you're the smartest person in the room, because you ain't. They got lots of brains. People you're working with, no matter who they are, and you working together. And so I suppose I've kind of gone in there in that way. Remember when I got the job in Victoria? I got we only had sort of crappy email to start with, but I got a message from a couple of the people that said, Christine, you're the best of a bad bunch. I went, right. And I got others who said, well, Christine, we'll just give you a fair chance and see how you go. So I have to say, we've gone from there. But I suppose the loveliest occasion for me about being a woman in charge was at the end when I retired. A police officer came in with his 8-year-old son, and he said, Christine, my son only knows that a woman is the Chief Commissioner of Police. And, I think it's the way you treat people. Thanks.
Do you have any more questions for Christine?
No, you can't be
Come on,
quiet.
there's got to be one.
Over here? Sure.
Thank you. Is it on? Yep. I'm mother of a young man who's in his late 20s and moving through a career with a multinational company. And he's increasingly giving me feedback, and I'm a strong feminist, so I brought him up very gender aware, but he's increasingly giving me feedback that he feels people are automatically assuming he thinks he's a certain way because he's a man. So I guess my question to you is, how do we make sure that we highlight those men, and particularly our younger men, who are actually doing the right thing, and support them through that process?
I mean, I'm not exactly sure how you in a multinational do that. I think if the people around him, they're able to be aware that that he is, in fact, they'll certainly know pretty quick that he's got decent attitudes and will support them, and all of those kind of things that I'm sure you encouraged in him. I think those CEOs and heads of organisations also, we need to recognise those people. I mean, Martin Parkinson has really taken a step out, actually, to make the kind of comments he made years ago with women in Treasury, of all places. So I think we need to obviously support men and women who are both making those kind of comments and support, and also I think we need to thank mothers who raise their sons to behave in those ways.
Christine, I've just got one question for you. Emma and I were just saying before how we often hear people say, oh, there's no women around. There's no women around. I don't know any women. I don't know any women that'd be able to go on a panel. I don't know any women that would be able to be a CE. There are more chief executives called Peter than there are female chief executives in this country, which I think is disgraceful.
Yep.
How do we as women highlight ourselves? Because we're not good at it. We do take a back seat. Do we need to be much more obvious with our employability as a gender group?
I think there's two parts of that. The one part is around organisations looking to attract women into leadership roles or into joining or whatever it might be. And so recently I was involved in a selection panel for a very high-level executive for an organisation, and we said to the headhunters, you will go and find women, you will ring them up, you will encourage them, you will, whatever it might be, do not come back to us unless you've got half the field as being female. And they did. And so part of it is the kind of systems you might use to encourage people. While I was in the Victoria Police, and some people will have heard me tell this story, we did lots of advertising to attract women. We got 43% of the applicants. So they saw me, they saw what we were doing, and women applied. And I think when women go, okay, I'll apply, because it looks like I'm going to actually get a fair go at this. And so we got 43%. But I used to go to grads and there were no women. I went, what's happened here? Like, we've got lots of them applying. Why would they not be able to get in? And then, of course, famously, I kind of called the recruiting people and said, where's the women? They said, I said, where are they? And he said, well, they apply, they go through all of the assessments, they're very good at all of that, and then we get to the wall. I said, what wall? They said, the wall. Like this high wall. I said, really? And I said, what happens? He said, well, they run at the wall, they hit the wall, and they fall over. He said, they're like lemmings, and he was laughing. And I said, are they? And he said, yeah. And I said, so what's about the wall? You can teach people to get over a wall. He said, oh, yes, but we don't. I said, great. I said, well, I've got the answer. And he said, what's that? I said, it's really simple. I said, we're not having the wall anymore. And he said, we'll be in trouble. And I said, I'm the Chief Commissioner. Get rid of the wall.
Oh, my God.
And so there was no reason for the wall. Police officers don't clamber over walls every minute, And in fact, it's dangerous often to do that, And so, so there it goes. So the wall went. Well, I find myself at a press conference the following day with a wall, And anyway, the wall went. And, strangely enough, lots of women came in. So I think, that's one example. Just another, in Victoria recently, the Premier announced 50% of the appointments to new boards would be women. And everybody said, where will we find those women? Well, thousands applied because they got a signal that said there's a decent system. and that you will be considered. Now, they made a mistake because what they didn't do was on the board there were requirements to be water engineers. And well, strangely enough, we're not enough women as water engineers. And so they were too fast and should have fixed that first, and then they should have advertised, because they got hundreds of fantastic women who could run anything to come on those boards. Now, they did get significant numbers, but they then whinged and said, but we couldn't get enough women to sit on those boards because we couldn't find enough women water engineers. And you see, so it's a guess, I think the piece is, if you signal to women that they are welcome, that they will be treated decently and fairly, and that they will be gone through a reasonable process, you'll get a lot more women step up. And then for the women themselves, it is a bit of putting ourselves forward. Go if you've got more than 4 or 5 bits of the key selection criteria, have a go.
Just one more question. Can you hear this on the microphone? Just one more question. At any point when you were the Chief Commissioner and you were coming across this level of sexism, did you ever just want to reach for your gun? That's a little bit of power in that one. No, she's not going to answer that one. I don't expect you to. Christine Nixon, thank you so much. Man, I tell you, I would have waved it around everywhere. But it's interesting, you do have to call it. I'll just tell you a little anecdotal story from my own life. On Saturday night, I emceed a function for International Women's Day, and it was a fundraiser. And of course, there's always that beautiful, live auction that we always look forward to, where they wheel out a Crows and a Port Guernsey, which is always just so wonderful. I'm surprised, I think we've probably all got one hanging, at least one hanging in our house. But it was interesting because the auctioneer was a man, and there were people bidding on this particular item, and bearing in mind it's an International Women's Day function, the auctioneer at one point, when the bid was on a woman, he said to a man, "Oh, come on, you're not going to let a woman beat you, are you?" And it was really interesting for me as the MC, because I didn't have a microphone in my hand at the time, but I just felt this huge need to grab one. So I sort of grabbed the microphone and I just said, "You're at an International Women's Day function, mate. Don't think that's the right way to go about it." And let me tell you, it was a bit embarrassing for him, but quite frankly, I didn't give a stuff, because for the rest of his life, he will never, ever, ever show such unconscious bias. So I think it's important that wherever we can, we call it as best as possible, but don't get out your gun. That's the lesson we've all learnt from Christine Nixon today. Don't get out your gun. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break shortly for morning tea, but before we do that, have a look at this video.